Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today we have author Sung-Yoon Lee and his book, The Sister, which is about the sister of North Korea's supreme leader. She's not nice, all right? Not to be a spoiler here, but she's not nice, and we talk about that. Yoon is an absolute gentleman. He is an expert on this stuff. He is going to say things like, no, I'm not an expert in my humble book and everything. Seriously, go to his Wikipedia page. As far as him not being an expert on North Korea, you can't trust that. He actually is one. Everything else you can take to the bank. I had a lot of fun talking to him. He's a fantastic human being. Can't wait for you to hear it. So I'm going to shut up so you can hear it. Let's do it. And here we are with author Sung-Yoon Lee, The Sister, North Korea's Kim Yo Jong, the most dangerous woman in the world. Yoon, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
So, Yoon, you're kind of a big deal when it comes to Korean studies. I'm just going to say it. I know you're going to say, no, you're not. But you are somebody, especially when it comes to North Korea, people want to talk to you about that country. What was kind of your journey to, hey, I want to be Korean studies is something that I want to be known for and I want to become a scholar in it?
Well, you're overly kind. To set the record straight, I'm a small fish in a vast ocean of dolphins and sharks and whales. My first real interest in North Korea happened rather late in my life as an adult, as a graduate student in my mid to late 20s. I, like the vast majority of South Korean youngsters, college students, grad school students, I remained basically apathetic, indifferent to North Korea and North Korean human rights. I say this because I've come to regret this general apathy on the part of South Korean society, and especially South Korea's very intelligent, hardworking college students, on issues like North Korea's egregious crimes against humanity, the human rights situation, the deplorable man-made, man-sustained hunger situation in North Korea. It's very regrettable, but it is a fact that South Korea, on the whole, remains rather indifferent to the suffering of the people of North Korea. I was like that too. And then sometime in the mid to late 1990s, I came across newspaper articles, first one and then more and more, on North Korea's horrific political prisoner concentration camps, modern-day gulags, some which are bigger than Washington, D.C., and how these inmates are not your conventional prisoners accused of having committed a heinous crime like murder or rape, and then tried before a judge with legal representation, if not before a jury of peers, then certainly a magistrate, and then sentenced to imprisonment. No, these are sometimes little kids, 5-year-olds. What was their sin, their crime? Nothing other than having been born to the accused parents or grandparents, and that in some cases, families across 3 generations, in many cases, are thrown into these political prisoner concentration camps. For what? For having complained how hard life is, for having said something not even directly, but indirectly negative about the vast indoctrination sessions that everyone has to undergo in schools, in life in North Korea. So as a student studying in the Boston area some 25 years ago, I felt a bit ashamed that I really knew nothing about North Korea's human rights situation and the regime's vast crimes. So human rights was the first portal through which I came to take interest in North Korean state and society. And since then, I've been a student and a teacher of North Korean history. And, North Korea is a very opaque regime, probably the world's most secretive regime. So it's very hard to establish and confirm basic facts, even basic facts, biological facts about the ruling family. But over the past 2 decades, I would meekly suggest that North Korean studies in the United States has made tremendous progress. Everyone, my former students, my colleagues are all working sort of together to try to put together a mosaic to this very secretive and weird and very criminal regime that is North Korea.
I very much like that you said weird, because it does get weird. But before we jump into that part, you could write, dozens of books on North Korea and not scratch the surface. You decided to start with Kim Yo Jong. Why did you decide to start with Kim Jong-un's sister? What about her story, or I should say also her lack of story, kind of drew you to her that you wanted to write this book focused on her?
Yeah, so I've been interested in her since I first laid my eyes on her image on North Korean state TV during the wake of her deceased father, Kim Jong-il, the second generation of North Korean dictator, the father of the current North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, and of course his younger sister, Kim Yo Jong. He died on December 17th, 2011, and then over the next week or so, North Korea had the body of the deceased displayed inside a glass coffin on a grand bed of flowers. And the proper funerary rite, the way to do it, to mourn in Korea, is to wail away, to be dramatic, to cry out loud and mourn visibly, audibly, the death of this person. And in North Korea, they do this even more dramatically because there are minders, there are people watching you. And if you clapped half-heartedly, which was one of the formal charges that the Kim siblings made against their uncle, Chang Sung-taek, before having him killed in 2013, before the presence of the supreme leader, or if you're mourning in a very contained, dignified, quiet way upon the death of the supreme leader, then your life will become precarious and probably short. So you do it dramatically, and you see these people, men, women, young and old, throwing themselves on the floor, beating with their fist the floor or whatever they can find. That's how North Koreans mourn the death of their supreme leader. And on the very last day of the wake, we saw Kim Jong-un show up, and by then we knew who he was, the next leader. And right behind the next supreme leader stood a young woman in the traditional black funeral robe with a thin white neckline, looking very thin. Her cheeks were sunken, they were hollow as if she had not eaten in several days. And she often dropped her head down to her right shoulder. She looked completely dejected, despondent. She didn't care about who might be looking at her, what cameras might be trained on her. It was genuine and profound pain and sorrow that I saw in her body language, her demeanor. And I thought, wow, that must be the youngest child, the daughter of Kim Jong-il. And she made quite an impression on me in that she looked really genuine and genuinely in pain. The next day at the state funeral, it was a snowy day. Some of our listeners might recall the hearse that North Korea used, the vehicle was a US-made Lincoln Continental carrying the deceased in a grand coffin with a giant photo of Kim Jong-il. And the destination of this funeral procession was the so-called Mount Kumsu Palace of the Sun, the world's biggest and most lavish, most extravagant mausoleum, where the first leader, the state founder and the grandfather of Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung, was embalmed, and then, of course, Kim Jong-il, his son, as of December 2011. Kim Jong-un stood in the middle, reviewing a small military parade, and to his right, to Kim's right, stood the top brass, the military people, and then to his left, the civilians, in quotation marks. And next to him stood a figurehead premier, Mr. Che. And then next to him, the premier stood Kim Young-nam, who was the chairman of the Supreme People's Assembly, the parliament, who accompanied Kim Yo Jong to South Korea for the Winter Olympic Games on February 9th, 2018. Both elderly men were veterans. They were by this time mere figureheads. And then number three spots removed from Kim Jong-un stood a young woman, his sister. And that suggested strongly to me that she was not just a family member, hence standing quite close to the supreme leader, now the new supreme leader, but that she was a high-ranking official of the new regime, and she was not just one of the children that Kim Jong-il had. Their older brother, that is all three children of the same mother, who died in 2004, Miss Ko Yong-hee. So the eldest child is a boy called Jung Chol. Kim Jong-chol has been cited over the years at Eric Clapton concerts in London, in Singapore, in Germany, in France too, I think. He's a gifted, accomplished amateur musician, but he has no appetite for politics, and Kim Jong-chol has never been photographed standing anywhere near his brother, the new supreme leader, since in the Kim Jong-un era, since 2011. So Kim Jong-chol's name was not even on the funeral committee of 250 persons. Kim Jong-chol was nowhere to be seen during the wake or the funeral since. The fact that Kim Yo Jong stood at the state funeral just 3 spots removed from her brother said a lot to me. So I was not completely surprised when she made her splashy international debut by visiting South Korea in 2018. But I was struck by her composure, her imperiousness, and her supreme confidence. She projected an arrogant sense of confidence as if she were superior to her interlocutors, including the top officials and the president of South Korea. This is for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics on February 9th, 2018.
And that's kind of how you start this book is, the Olympics and her big coming out party, as you mentioned. What I really, really appreciate about the book too, and you've just kind of sort of touch on it, this was a big hit in South Korea. Everybody was just delighted that she came out and like, oh, this, and look what she's wearing. Like she was just this wonderful movie actress who just showed up. But what I really appreciated is you put that in context. As you were just saying, there was an imperiousness, and there were certain things too within the Korean culture that you mentioned. For Americans, she was basically giving everybody the finger sometimes, not literally, but figuratively. Can you talk a little bit about that, how the South Korean media, at the very least, was almost deifying her themselves?
Well, at the outset, I said South Korea as a society remains somewhat indifferent to North Korea. But when there is this kind of dramatic debut or coming out, a dramatic image makeover of the North Korean leader or his close sister, by now physically being in South Korea, by coming to South Korea, that creates sensational excitement and irrationally exuberant expectations of genuine peace, reconciliation, denuclearization, and peaceful reunification, and all those sweet-sounding things. So yes, South Korea as a society, it seemed to me, went berserk, but by then, this was like Rambo 4 to me, because I've been studying North Korea for some 25 years, and I've seen such dramatic image makeover virtually overnight by the grandfather and by Kim Yo Jong's father, Kim Jong-il, when he became the first North Korean leader to put on the first ever inter-Korean summit meeting in Pyongyang in June 2000, and thereby come across to the world not as a crazy, hard-drinking, womanizing playboy dictator, but a reasonable man, a reasonable chap with whom the world could do business. So when Kim Yo Jong, her brother's plane, touched down at the major South Korean international airport, Incheon International Airport, on the day of the opening ceremony, February 9th, 2018, I was watching this live on cable news, South Korean news, and there were many commentators switching back and forth, many commentators, North Korea experts, professors, and so on, who commented that what a great historical moment this was, that the fact that Kim Jong-un was sending his dear sister to South Korea must mean something way beyond just courtesy. It must mean that Kim Jong-un seeks genuine peace by sending as the messenger his dear sister. And so many news anchors and commentators were so disappointed when the plane, having touched down in South Korea and having taxed along, the plane stopped, and then we saw a jet bridge instead of the important royal personage descending down the staircase from the plane onto a red carpet and shaking hands with South Korean dignitaries, people were quite disappointed that we would have to wait even longer to catch the very first glimpse of this mysterious princess. Her first stage entrance, if you will, was when she walked in to the VIP reception room at the airport. The figurehead, titular head of the delegation, Mr. Kim Young-nam, 90 years young at the time, he was led into the VIP room before she, but he looked somewhat nervous. He caught himself as if he'd been caught stealing a cookie from the cookie jar, looked behind, and there came the sister a couple of seconds after he did, and then he looked relieved. And the South Korean head of the South Korean hosting delegation was the Minister of Unification, who was seated in the middle across the table from the North Koreans. And the minister pointed to the 90-year-old Mr. Kim from North Korea to take the seat right across from him as the head of the North Korean delegation. Mr. Kim astutely demurred and looked toward Kim Yo Jong and said, "Please, you take the senior-most seat across the table from the South Korean head of the delegation, host delegation." She said no, with a nice smile, and she pointed, slightly cupped her hands, and then straightened out her fingers and told Mr. Kim to take the seat of honor. He said, no, you take it. And then she did this. No, you take it. Now, in Korean culture, if you were really deferential and respectful, the way to gesture would be with your hands slightly cupped. No, you, senior, respected leader, you take this seat, please. But the way she did it was a command. No, just take the seat. Yet she did it with a smile. It was an order. And I think South Koreans who are very smart and know these things, of course, about decorum and mannerism, all seem to forget and maybe fall into collective amnesia at the sight of this mysterious, imperious woman. As she walked into that VIP reception room, she remained erect in erect carriage. Her gaze were fixed on maybe 3 different spots across the room on the wall with cameras whirring. There were dozens of reporters already there. And she looked so comfortable as if she were entering her own living room. She did not exude any sense of excitement or overly being happy to be there. No sense of nervousness whatsoever. She looked across the room, slightly moving her head left and right, and then just took her seat. And that showed that, she had, like other royalty training. She's a princess. So she knows how to exude confidence in the face of foreign dignitaries. And that's all she did. She never talked to the press, to the South Korean people. She attended the opening ceremony. And I thought the seating configuration in the VIP box that evening for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics, very strange.
Why is that? So what was about the seating that was so strange that said something to you about maybe how this entire thing was staged?
Well, understandably, the foreign dignitaries, most of them were already seated. And then the South Korean host, President Moon, and his wife, the First Lady, made their entrance. And the optics of this, as it was said, historic handshake between President Moon and Kim Yo Jong, the optics were really weird because the North Korean delegation was seated above and behind the South Korean president and his wife, the host, and also above the head of the U.S. delegation, Vice President Mike Pence and Mrs. Pence. Kim Yo Jong was seated behind the U.S. Vice President, 2 spots removed, that is, in the row behind Pence, but not directly behind him. But from certain camera angles, it appeared as if she were lording it over U.S. Vice President Pence, as if she were breathing down his neck. And throughout the evening, she maintained what I call this sort of Mona Lisa smirk smile. Slight smile, yes, but a lot of scowl as well, holding her chin up as if she knew that she was the center of attention, that she was jazzing up the hitherto lackluster Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang in South Korea. And when Moon shook her hand, he extended his arm, and of course he had to extend his arm upward toward her. And she smiled, she was polite, and she shook his hand, but she did not extend her arm. In Korean culture, if you're the younger person, especially before head of state, you're shaking their hand, you would extend both arms, perhaps even cupping your left hand on the dignitary's hand. No, she did nothing of the kind and just shook his hand. And at that moment, I was kind of impressed how imperious she really was. And throughout the evening, it felt really weird that she sort of, sat there with a scowl right above, it seemed, Vice President Mike Pence.
Because when you're talking about North Korea, nothing is an accident. Everything is political theater. What really blew my mind, too, is when you start the book, something else you start with is there's a reason why you jump to the funeral where you talk about her, because most of the world didn't even know she existed officially. How old was she when the world even found out what her name was?
Well, North Korea mentioned her name for the first time in March 2014. She was born in September 1987, so our listeners can do the math. She was quite young, and still is. She's only 35 as of early 2024. And her brother's relatively young, too. He just turned 40 in January 8th, 2024. So he could be around for the next 30, 40 years, but maybe not. And my contention is not that she is the next leader and no one else, but that for the foreseeable future, for the next at least 10 years, probably 15 years or more, until one of Kim Jong-un's children comes of age, becomes an adult in their mid-20s, she is the only person of the so-called Mount Baekdu bloodline, direct line descendant of the state founder, Kim Il-sung, who is capable, who is viable, who is a family member, the royal descendant, who can assume the throne in case Kim Jong-un becomes incapacitated today and for the foreseeable future for the next 15 years or so. You mentioned, was Kim Yo Jong sending a big discourteous middle finger message to the United States? Yes, she was, and Mike Pence knew it, and he tried to avoid her at the opening ceremony dinner that evening, did not attend the dinner, in fact. In so doing, I understand and respect his position, but maybe in terms of the optics, he made an unforced error by coming across as uninterested in peace. He could have, extended his hand and tried to shake her hand. And if she resisted and if she, ignored him, then the onus is then on her as the discourteous party. But as the older person, I think Pence could have maybe projected a softer image on the world stage. So some mistakes were made on the US side too, perhaps, but Kim Yo Jong knew what she was doing. And the next day when she visited President Moon in the Blue House, the presidential office and mansion, she brought a letter of invitation from her brother to President Moon, inviting him to come to North Korea at a time that's convenient to him. And that was the big message, of course. And that further seemed to consolidate the public view that, yes, she was the messenger of peace, and everything henceforth from now on would be all hunky-dory between the North and South. But again, I've seen that movie before. There have been previous inter-Korean summits, joint statements calling for peace and unification and all those good things, all the while North Korea was sharpening their dagger, increasing their nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, how long did this movie last before she started calling people idiots and stupid and we should be allowed to kill you? About how long did it take between the Olympics and when that happened?
Well, the Olympics were in February 2018. As of April the next year in 2019, Kim Jong-un actually was the first to disparage President Moon, calling him an unwelcome busybody who should mind his own business. That was in April 2019. But then in August, there was an epic statement by a North Korean agency, Committee for the Reunification of the Fatherland, that referred to President Moon as such a ridiculous man saying stupid things as to make the boiled head of a cow burst out in laughter. I don't know if she wrote that herself, but She had been running her nation's very powerful propaganda and agitation department since officially 2014, but in reality since 2012, soon after her father's death. So she would have signed off on a statement like that, insulting President Moon, who had been so courteous to her and to her brother. So, yeah, the bonhomie, the good, warm, fuzzy feeling lasted less than a year and a half.
And that's another thing, too, is you talk about that she's had a few different stops or different titles and things like that. Is that just something like sometimes they just move things around? Is a title change in North Korea an indication of either favor or disfavor? I mean, what I just keep thinking about is it's just as likely that she somehow becomes a supreme leader in the next 3 days. It's just as likely that Kim Jong-un has her killed in the next 3 days. It just seems like North Korea kind of works like that.
Sure, titles are not irrelevant, but in North Korea, titles matter far less than in more conventional, normal countries. Her title is the Vice Department Director of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea. She is sort of number 2 in the propaganda and agitation department, and overall that places her somewhere around 45th or top 50th or so, which is not, insignificant, but not, of course, near the very top. But again, she can have a 4-star general, a 5-star marshal sent away or even killed. She occupies an uncontested, unique position in the hierarchy, and the basis for my assessment is based on many things, but also by watching hundreds of hours of North Korean video footage. During the first inter-Korean summit meeting that Kim Jong-un held, which was with President Moon at the border village on April 27th, 2018, Kim Jong-un, he's a good actor too. He knows how to do propaganda. And when Kim and President Moon shook hands over the dividing line, the military demarcation line, I expected Kim to invite Moon to step over into his side, the North Korean side. It does not take a genius to make that guess. But so Kim slightly pulled President Moon and gestured to step over this elevated little block and step into North Korea. And Moon, for a split second, looked startled. And then he recovered and put on a big grin, happy smile, and the two held hands and walked back and forth over the dividing line like separated twin brothers at birth. They know, the North Korean leaders know how to do diplomacy, how to do a dramatic, peaceful outreach, a post-provocation peace ploy, in addition to sounding crazy, sounding threatening to nuke the White House as Kim Jong-un did in 2013 and so on. So I think they really cultivate intentionally their own weird image. It's sort of weaponizing your own weirdness so that when you act normal and affable and pleasant, the other side is stunned. And over the years, people who have met Kim Il-sung, the grandfather, Kim Jong-il, the father, and Kim Jong-un, they all say the same things. Wow, the crazy-looking North Korean dictator is not only not crazy, but he's actually kind of charming. He's very intelligent. He's not stupid. He knows a lot about us, the United States, even U.S. history. He knows a lot about my own personal career. Wow. He's self-effacing. He's humorous. He says very reasonable things like he's willing to meet with the South Korean dictator. This is back in 1972. To New York Times reporters, Kim Il-sung said, "I'm willing to meet the South Korean military man turned dictator president of South Korea without making preconditions of the withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea. They'll have to go sometime, but, I don't need to make that a precondition. Willing to meet, willing to talk anytime. And, my anti-U.S. stance, well, I have to do this because Americans killed a lot of North Koreans during the Korean War, so I have a constituency to please. So I don't mean it, everything that I say, but I have to say, yeah, Yankee go home, death to America. And the visitors then come away after this 3-hour chat thinking that the North Korean dictator is a profoundly reasonable dictator who is not crazy, who is very smart. And they feel that they've sort of made an emotional connection, even an intellectual connection with the North Korean, previously crazy North Korean dictator, in part because of their own charm, maybe their charisma, intelligence. And now they want to believe everything he says. this cyclical pattern of the crazy dictator turning not only reasonable but quite charming.
You know, they say that about serial killers and psychopaths, that they seem very nice when you meet them. But of course, they're still serial killers and psychopaths. Is there a difference between the brother and the sister here? Or, like you're saying, is everyone in lockstep? Just for instance, if somehow Kim Yo Jong had to take over tomorrow, is it just going to be the same movie over and over again? Or is she, because just from some of the things that she says and looking at the news, she almost seems a bit more aggressive? Or is that just the place that she's in right now?
So I failed to tell my mini story by referring to the April 27, 2018 first meeting between Kim and the then South Korean President Moon Jae-in. So there was a banquet, where Kim Jong-un was honored with all the South Korean principals, defense minister, foreign minister, head of the intelligence agency, and so on, basically standing in line to pour Kim a drink. And in Korean culture, you pour to be respectful with both hands, and then you hold your cup or wine glass with both hands. Kim's the supreme leader, so he held his glass or cup with one hand, and all the South Korean principals are very deferentially pouring for him. And he downed all those shots. He's a great imbiber on top of everything else. And the final event on this dramatic day on the schedule was an outdoor concert following the dinner. And the last person to exit the building is Kim Yo Jong. By then, all the principals, everyone, South Korean president and his wife, and the South Korean dignitaries, Kim Jong-un and his wife, Lee Sol-ju, and all the North Korean officials are already seated, waiting for the concert to begin. And the concert cannot begin because an important person has yet to take her seat. Does she rush, like semi-run toward her seat, exuding, signaling, "Oh, I'm so sorry, here I am"? No, she just walks down casually and takes her seat on the edge of the front row makeshift bench. And no North Korean official dare even throw a glance at her like, "Hurry up, why so slow?" They don't turn their eyeballs and look at her. Kim Jong-un doesn't say anything, doesn't look at her either. It's completely okay. It's normal. No one else in North Korea can get away with that. And again, one of the formal charges that she and her brother made against their uncle, who had grown a bit arrogant in December 2013, was on top of, being a traitor and so on, a womanizer, was half-heartedly clapping at Kim Jong-un's events after his speech. In North Korean videos, there is one person in a room of 5,000 people or 500 people or 20 people who's usually half-heartedly clapping after her brother speaks, after Kim Jong-un speaks. And sometimes she doesn't clap at all. On February 8th, last year in 2023, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of Army Founding Day in North Korea, Kim Jong-un had a big banquet with his officials and generals, and he showcased his cute little daughter who walked down the red carpet holding her daddy's hand with the mother, Kim Jong-un's wife, half step behind her husband and her daughter. And of course, when Kim made his entrance with his family, everyone there, of course, already all there, they're clapping wildly, including all the top officials. There is one young woman wearing a white jacket who is not only not wildly clapping, but not clapping at all. She's just standing there smiling with her arms by her side, Kim Yo Jong. No one else can get away with that kind of body language. So that speaks volumes to me about the genuine trust and affection that Kim Jong-un has for his sister. And at these formal events, including summit meetings with President Trump and President Moon and President Xi and so on, Xi Jinping of China, the two siblings often steal glimpses of each other. They look at each other for a split second, and sometimes they just cackle, they smile for a second, as if they're in constant communication. So, I'm just trying to read the body language, and I may get things wrong a lot of the times, but I see genuine affection and trust and brotherly, sisterly love. That is complete confidence and affection and appreciation for each other. So for now, again, I don't see that kind of unique standing of the royal sister change anytime soon. But as you intimated, yes, it is a medieval style dynasty replete with nepoticide, avunculicide, fratricide. I looked up all these words in the dictionary. They're real words. Killing of the nephew, nepoticide, it's happened before. Avunculicide, of course, we've seen that. Fratricide, the killing of Kim Jong-il's eldest son, Kim Jong-nam, the older half-brother of Kim Jong-un, with a deadly VX chemical agent in a crowded international airport in Malaysia in February 2017. And there are other examples too. So in a dynasty like that, maybe even somebody like Kim Yo Jong may face certain brush with death, who knows, years down the road, perhaps, but not now. She has the absolute trust of her brother, as far as I can tell.
Now, you just mentioned some very scary stuff. Do you ever worry about your own safety? I mean, they have killed people for a lot less than things that you've written in this book. Do you ever kind of think, maybe not get too close to the border just in case?
Again, I'm a small fish, Brendan. I mean, I'm sure they're not exceptionally pleased to hear that I've written a book slamming them and their family. But being narcissistic, maybe they're not all that displeased either. Who knows? Harming me would probably not bring such great good to the regime. That's my wishful thinking. They do hack my computer, but that's par for the course for people who write on North Korean issues, including reporters. So, that's just standard. That's just...
You'd probably be insulted if they didn't at least do that, right? Then that means,
No, I really wish they would just forget and go on with their lives and forget about some guy out there in the US who's written a book on the royal sister of North Korea. But yeah, I have no plans to visit North Korea anytime soon.
Now, there is no way that you can cover, you've written a lot of wonderful papers on this, but for somebody who really hasn't thought about this before but is now thinking of it now, is there a way to deal with North Korea? Is there a way to deal with this woman and her brother that we can get to where we want to get, which, and I think we talked about this right before I hit record, the people of North Korea, they're ignored in this. Is there a positive way to move forward with this country, or as long as this leadership, this bloodline is in place, is it hopeless?
I really appreciate all your very thoughtful questions. It's a hard question to which there is, I fear, not a very satisfactory answer. I think there was a window of opportunity maybe 10 years ago, maybe certainly 20 years ago, when the US and the international community could have galvanized the entire world, or much of the world as possible, to really enforce sanctions against North Korea. But I think it may be too late for that because primarily of Russia and indirectly China and North Korea itself that are in brazen violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions that President Xi of China and President Putin of Russia endorsed over the past many years since the first ever UN Security Council resolution sanctioning North Korea, which came out in October 2006 in the wake of North Korea's first nuclear test. There is a lot of misperception about the nature of sanctions. It's not something like a light switch you can just turn on and off, like starting a car engine, like after years of lax enforcement. Like criminal investigation or enforcement of criminal laws, it's labor intensive. You have to do surveillance, investigation, build up your case, gather evidence. It's extremely labor intensive, and most nations of the world don't have a dog in this fight, in this game, so they're apathetic. But in large part, thanks to Kim Jong-un himself, throughout 2016 and 17, when North Korea was shooting off ICBMs for the first time, intercontinental ballistic missile. The first ever launch by North Korea was on U.S. Independence Day, July 4th, 2017. And in 2016, I mentioned the unlawful hostage-taking and torture of Otto Warmbier, a U.S.-based University of Virginia student. But North Korea also that year in 2016 conducted 2 nuclear tests, fired off the first ever and then the second submarine-launched ballistic missiles. In 2017, another nuclear test, the first hydrogen bomb test in September 2017, and 3 ICBM launches in that year. After the first one on July 4th, Kim Jong-un said this is, quote, a special care package for American bastards, end quote. That is the official North Korean translation, English translation, and that there will be more such gift packages coming American bastards' way. And again, indeed, in late July, North Korea fired off its second ICBM. So during those dark days, many nations were on board the US-led effort to enforce sanctions, both US sanctions and UN sanctions against North Korea. Several nations expelled the North Korean ambassador, the head of mission, from their host country, including Spain, Italy, Kuwait, Mexico, and a few others. It's a symbolic gesture, but still kind of, embarrassing to North Korea. But with Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago, we're living in a different world, an old familiar world of the Cold War era, where people have become more brazen, more shameless, and are in flagrant violation of international laws and international norms. So I think denuclearizing North Korea is virtually impossible at this point, unfortunately. But does that mean we're just feeble and impotent? What I try to stress in the book and in general is this uniquely cruel policy in North Korea of deliberate mass starvation. That is a legal term, an accusation made in a monumental UN report on human rights in North Korea published 10 years ago, the UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea. And in that 373-page report, the section on North Korea's policy of deliberate mass starvation is, to me, the most shocking and intellectually intriguing, but the most disturbing. The report makes the very credible and serious accusation of knowingly causing prolonged starvation. That is a verbatim quote from the UN report, that North Korea has been knowingly causing prolonged starvation. To many people, it just seems absurd. Why would any regime, country do that, even dictatorial ones? What net benefit is there to deliberately starving off a huge segment of the population? It's such an unconventional notion. It's hard to answer that question. But the evidence is clear and ample. North Korea is so unique, so unconventional, and you might say every nation, every individual is unique, but North Korea is really, really unique, so different that I often say North Korea is uniquely unique. North Korea is the only industrialized, urbanized, literate, peacetime nation to have suffered a famine in world history, and I believe will forever remain the only country, such country, to have undergone a famine.
If I could magically and safely, that word safely, I definitely needs to be part of this question. If I could safely put you in a room with Kim Yo Jong, would you do it, or would it be a waste of time? Would it just not even be worth the time to sit and talk to a person like this?
I would. And in fact, a very high-ranking former U.S. official put that question to Kim Jong-un right to his face at a 3-hour-long meeting in North Korea with Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo Jong and a North Korean translator. Kim Jong-un felt puzzled, annoyed by this irrelevant question. And he did a Korean gesture with a big sound, exclamation, and with a hand gesture like, take this away. What is this question? It doesn't concern me. That was his response. And I'm afraid, when he was young, Kim Jong-un, according to the family sushi chef, Japanese sushi chef from Japan, who rode Kim Jong-il's train and drank beer and smoked cigarettes with a young Kim Jong-un when Kim was 16, had a 5-hour-long conversation. The 16-year-old boy was concerned about the pervasive hunger in his nation and wanted to help the people. And this story to me is completely credible because you're spoiled as a young princeling, of course, but a part of you is idealistic. And I'm sure it's not made up that Kim Jong-un felt some empathy for his people and wanted to do the right thing when he was just a child. But once you become a supreme leader, you're like a godlike entity. You are God in North Korea. You're infallible. Everyone cowers, trembles, casts their gaze down in your presence. You can do no wrong. And then you become so above the people that their hunger and misfortune and oppression and misery, it's not your business. They are just pawns to be used, to be exploited. So I'm afraid, that's how it seems. That's how Kim Jong-un seems to regard the hunger, the suffering of his own people, and it doesn't surprise me. But yes, if I had the opportunity, I would very politely ask that question to Kim Yo Jong and what she intends to do about this problem.
My last question for you, Yoon, and we talk about this with history nerds, is there's a lot of people who are like, I don't read nonfiction, I don't read things, contemporary politics and stuff like that. If I sat one of those people in front of you and they said, why should I read this sister? I think we actually said a lot of reasons why, but just to put a pin in this one, what would you say to that person who says, oh, why should I read this book?
Well, I think we tend to, historically, we as in the international community have sort of patronized the funny-looking, cruel North Korean dictator, not taken them seriously. Same goes to Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo Jong. She is a young woman. She has her proverbial finger on the nuclear button. She keeps telling the world that she does, that she can unleash her nation's nuclear forces on South Korea and bring about something next to total ruin and annihilation. That was a written statement in April 2022 that she issued against South Korea. And there are no checks and balances in North Korea. It's a medieval style absolute monarch, a king, and his little sister, the princess, ruling this kingdom. So it's a destabilizing and a very threatening entity, the North Korean state ruled by the Kims. We have to take them seriously, and we have to stop underestimating them, patronizing them. And one of the main points that I try to make in the book is Kim Yo Jong has been playing the role of the even worse cop to her brother's bad cop since the onset of COVID. She's been more aggressive verbally. She's been more rude than her brother has been toward her interlocutors. And it's a very clever role reversal from Kim Jong-un's bad cop and Kim Yo Jong's good cop when she visited South Korea in 2018, for example. There will come a day, I'm sure, when North Korea launches a charming peace offensive, and she will be the pretty, feminine, softer female face of her nation's charm offensive. And because of, I think, the pervasive tendency in many men, not all, of course, but in many of us, and some women too, I would dare say, to patronize and underestimate young, smart, hardworking, especially young women, to sort of think, oh yeah, they're smart and, they're saying the right things, but maybe they were swayed by my own charm and grace and intelligence. Maybe, I can mold them. I can teach them. I can guide them. Maybe she's malleable. Maybe she's saying all these right things because, she's charmed by me. All these strange fantasies, the tendency to patronize young women in many of us, I think works to her advantage, to North Korea's advantage. The sweet-sounding things will sound more credible because they're coming from a young, pretty woman than her surly-looking, less photogenic brother. When Kim Yo Jong issued a written statement calling on South Korea to criminalize sending anti-North Korea leaflets across the border, the South Korean government acted with rare alacrity and said, okay, within 4.5 hours, they said, we are going to work on this new bill. And they did, criminalizing the sending not only of leaflets, but everything under the sun with an exchange value, like a tube of toothpaste even. Had that command or request come from her brother, I'm not sure South Korea would have done it so quickly with such pleasure. But it came from a young woman who at the time was still kind of charming, I guess. So it's easier to underestimate and easier to forgive and forget the foul language of a pretty young woman than a surly-looking male figure. And this is an unprecedented development in this male-dominated chauvinistic state and society called North Korea. Kim Yo Jong is who she is, the second in command of arguably the world's most tyrannical criminal regime. Don't believe everything she says just because it sounds sweet and it comes from the mouth of a pretty powerful woman.
Well, Yoon, I love the book. Thank you so much for making me smarter on North Korea and for coming on the podcast.
Very kind. Thank you for this opportunity, Brendan.
And that's it for this episode. Yoon, thank you so much for coming on. The Sister, super interesting book. You're going to learn a lot. I think you'll really love it. Hit us up, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Don't forget our new YouTube page. Go on. We're going to have some new stuff coming up soon that I think you're going to absolutely love. That'll only be on YouTube. But until next time, nerds, stay cool.
History Nerds United.